Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's ranking the Star Trek security slash tactical officers. This video is a part of a series of videos where I rank the various different characters from the different Star Trek shows in order of what I think they're better at according to their job. So, in this video, I will be covering security and tactical officers. Yeah, they usually go hand in hand, sometimes not, but yeah, basically the muscle, the ones who fire the weapons. Anyway, so let me just jump right into it. The characters I have eligible for this ranking that I'm going to rank in order from the ones I think are least capable at their jobs to the ones that are most capable at their jobs. The characters are Pavel Chekhov, Worf, Odo, Tuvok, Malcolm Reed, Ash Tyler, Elnor, and Shax. So Chekhov is probably the biggest stretch on here, but there wasn't a security officer on the original series, and I don't know if Chekhov was technically the tactical officer, but he was usually the one that fired the phasers. And there were a couple episodes where he beamed down to the planet with Kirk and essentially served as his bodyguard. So I am going to count Chekhov because he's the closest thing the original series has. Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager, very clear. Worf, Odo, Tuvok, very clear about that. Odo is not a tactical officer, though. He's just a security chief, but yeah, that still counts. And of course, Enterprise is also clear with Malcolm Reed, who's very gun hungry anyway. And Ash Tyler was the security officer on Discovery. Apparently, the tactical officer was Reese, whatever his name is. But he's barely appeared. He's kind of like one of those those characters you just see in the background who push the buttons and say, "Oh, sir." Ash Tyler was more the main character, so of course I'm going to go with him. Now, Elnor from Star Trek Picard was not an officer at all. And he wasn't really security, but he served as Picard's bodyguard and basically the muscle for the crew. So I'm counting him, even though he technically he's not an officer, and he's technically not a security or tactical officer because he's not an officer at all. But Picard is a bit different because they're not an official Starfleet crew. They're more like a ragtag crew, and he served as the muscle, so and Picard's bodyguard, so I am counting him. Now Shax is from Lower Decks. Now most of these ranking videos I haven't included characters from Lower Decks, but I felt like and a lot of it was due to the fact it was still airing when I was making those videos, but now the first season's complete, and I'm pretty confident to say Shax deserves a spot on this list as the security chief tactical officer because he was very stereotypical on that job about, come on, let me fire the phasers, come on. So I just had to include him. So like all my lists or all these videos that I do have a rule that there's only one security officer per TV show, or one character I should say per TV show eligible for the list. So therefore you will not find characters like Tasha Yar or Michael Eddington or Lieutenant Nan because yeah, there's only one security officer per show. So Worf is the one from Next Generation, Odo's the one from Deep Space Nine, and Ash Tyler's the one from Discovery, so you're not going to have these extra ones, even though some people might like to compare them. I'm sticking to my formula of one character per show. As always, I'm ranking these characters according to what I personally believe. Now, it is my opinion, but it's what I believe who is best at their job, at being a security chief or tactical officer, not which character I personally like the best, or which one I think is more well developed, or which one brings better storytelling. It's not about that. It's about who's better at their job. Who is the security chief tactical officer I would want on my ship? So, let's begin the rankings, and we'll start at the bottom with Ash Tyler. No, he wasn't bad. I don't think there's any bad security chiefs or tactical officers on this list, but he was a bit emotionally unstable. I mean, it's kind of understandable considering what he suffered, but it often interfered with his job. And, of course, the fact that he was actually a Klingon agent in disguise that eventually killed people in the crew, that certainly didn't help. And then, of course, he came back as a Section 31 agent, and then he was a bit, sort of shady, and the crew didn't trust him. Yeah, as far as being effective at their jobs, Ash Tyler is clearly at the bottom here. Next pick that I have on my list, second to the bottom, is Chekov. Now, there's nothing wrong with Chekov, but as I said, I was kind of stretching it, including him on this list, because he wasn't the security chief, and there's a few times he served as Kirk's bodyguard, sort of, and he kind of sort of did a good job at it. And he was just, basically the one there to push the buttons and fire phasers or whatnot. So there was nothing particularly special about him as far as this particular job goes. So he's second to the bottom here. So next on my list is Malcolm Reed. Now Malcolm Reed, I think we're getting into the really strong tactical officers, and it's a bit misnomer that he appears as low on the list, because I actually think he's great at his job. He was always on alert. He was always warning Archer, who's very naive and dumb, that hey, maybe you shouldn't be so naive and dumb, and actually be a bit more prepared and defensive, and we should get our defense weapons more ready. We should be more prepared. Although a strike against Reed is the way he behaved when the Makos came on the Enterprise, as he became very territorial and he was very immature and made it like a pissing contest of who was in command, either he and the Makos, which is not very professional behavior, Mr. Reed. But other than that, he was actually very astute, very strong security officer who's always on top of things, and making sure that Enterprise was well prepared. So next on my list will be Elnor, who again is not actually a security officer, but he was the muscle. He was Picard's bodyguard, and he mostly served. I mean, I had to put him up this high because he was such a fucking badass, because he would chop people's heads off, which I know a lot of Star Trek fans, oh, that's so un-Star Trek life, but whatever. And of course, Picard did tell him off for doing that. And he was such a badass who was always prepared, who would be willing to give his life to protect the crew. So he's definitely someone you want on your side. That being said, there is that one time where he just abandoned Picard, who was supposed to be the person he was supposed to protect, to run off with Seven of Nine into some adventure on the Borg ship, and just left Picard alone. Like, that wasn't a very good protecting job. So that's why he doesn't appear higher. But since he's such a badass, I had to at least put him this high. Alright, so next on my list is Shax. And God, I love this character from Lower Decks. I mean, I had to put him this high because he literally gave his life. Spoilers, by the way. He gave his life for the ship, and he went out in true badass fashion, going out and really kicking ass, and just ramming a shuttle into another ship, and just going in and start kicking everyone's ass to buy time for his crew to survive, to escape alive. And that's essential in the best security officer that you want. Now, he doesn't appear higher because he was, of course, this is a comedy show, and so he was a bit over the top silly sometimes about, come on, I want to fire phasers, and just he was too gun hungry and too ready to attack, and not really where a tactical officer needs to be more tactical. Needs to think things a bit more logically and use tactics, and not always just jump to, come on, let me kick their ass, which is what he was. But again, he was such a badass, had to be this high. So We get into my top 3, who I think are the best security / tactical officers in the Star Trek. So let me start. And it was hard to rank these 3 because they're all great. But let me start first with Tuvok. And the reason why I put him slightly below the other 2, even though I love Tuvok, is because the writers did mishandle him in the later seasons and kind of make him a Ponzi and didn't really give him much to do. And they misused his full potential. But we do see in the earlier seasons that he is a great tactical officer. He's a great security officer. He's always assessing the threat for every situation. Sometimes, Janeway and other people think he's overreacting or being too suspicious, but that's actually what you want from a security officer, because the captain can overrule and bring reason into it and being like, well, you're worrying a bit too much, but you want your security officer to always think of what's the worst case scenario and how can we deal with this. And Tuvok was great at that, and of course he was also a great tactical officer. Being a Vulcan, he used logic and it was interesting seeing, because most Vulcans in Star Trek are science officers, but it's so interesting seeing a security officer who could bring that logic and rationale towards tactics, which you actually do need to look at it from a logical perspective. And I thought he was extremely effective as a security chief and tactical officer, even though if the writer kind of did him dirty in the later seasons. Anyway, so my number 2, and then this is really hard going back and forth, number 1, number 2, but number 2, I'm going to have to give it to Worf. Of course, Worf is kind of similar to Shax, and Shax was a bit of a parody off of Worf, to be fair, the way Worf was like always wanting the fire phases, but Worf is actually... he is a bit tempered. He does, he sort of always jumps to the worst case scenario, kind of like Tuvok did, and Picard's there to be reasonable and say, no, Mr. Worf, let's not fire phasers now. But Worf is always on the ready, and he wasn't really like, come on, let me fire the phasers the way Shax was. He did, and if Picard told him not to, then he wouldn't. And he was always on top of things as chief of security. He was great at protecting the away teams. Worf was just an honorable man, a huge badass, and definitely someone who absolutely won on your side. And I very nearly gave the number 1 to him because he's just almost the perfect security chief. However, I did hold it back slightly because Worf did get his ass kicked a bit too much. In fact, a lot of people make fun of it and say that Worf isn't a good fighter, which is not true, because there are some really great examples of Worf kicking ass and being an amazing fighter. Like, he won a Bat'leth tournament, for fuck's sake. But, and he killed Gowron. Again, spoilers. So, in hand-to-hand combat. So, he's a great fighter. It's just... the problem, again, is writing, is that the writers, whenever they wanted to showcase a badass villain and say how difficult the situation was, the easy cheat way to do that was to have the biggest badass get his ass kicked to prove, ooh, look, this is a tough villain, a tough situation. And they use that a bit too much, where some people came off that Worf as a pansy, but that's just the writers trying to show, this person is so badass they can even beat Worf. But because of that, I do have to hold him back a little bit, because he did get his ass kicked a little too much. So, my number 1 security chief / tactical officer is Odo. Now, Odo's not a tactical officer at all, as I mentioned. He is just a security chief, but he is probably the best damn one you want. Now, unlike most of the other security chiefs, even Tuvok, because sometimes Tuvok served as an investigator who would investigate crimes, and he did a fairly good job. But no offense to Mr. Tuvok, not as good as Odo. Odo is like a detective and a Worf type security officer rolled into one. He's exactly what you would want. He actually doesn't need to be tempered by the captain the way that, actually does need to be tempered, because sometimes he can be a bit of authoritarian and wanting to lock everything down, and Sisko has to sort of hold him back from that and be like, look, we have to respect people's freedoms. But again, he does take that in stride. Of course, in the first season, he was like, damn, Starfleet. But eventually, he learned to work with Starfleet and the Bajorans and become a bit more tempered. And he became exactly the kind of security chief you want on your side, who is very intelligent. Of course, being a shapeshifter doesn't hurt at all. He's able to go and invest in go places most people want and disguise himself very easily. And he's able to, just assess the situation and investigate who's at fault and able to lock down any emergency situation and handle it as quick as possible. And he's very cool under pressure. So exactly the security chief you would want. So my number one pick for security chief tactical officer is Odo. So that's it for my ranking of the Star Trek security / tactical officers. And again, this is just my opinion. If you want to leave your opinion in the comments below, please feel free to do so, as it's interesting to see how other various people would rank these characters. But here for this ranking, that's just my opinion. Anyway, that is it for my ranking of the Star Trek security tactical officers. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out this video. Be sure to check out many more Star Trek videos that I do on my channel, as well as covering other shows like The Expanse, Breaking Bad, The Outer Limits, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.